A man at the top of his game, with the world of wealth at his fingertips, decides to treat his young lover to a weekend of unrivaled luxury. He books the presidential suite at the Grand Elysee, the city's most exclusive five-star hotel, a monument to old money and power. He thought he had it all planned out. The perfect escape, a secret safely kept within soundproof walls. He believed that his quiet, beautiful wife, a woman he saw as nothing more than a beautiful decoration for his home, would not suspect anything. But he made one fatal mistake, one colossal miscalculation. He chose the wrong hotel. He walked into the arms of his mistress for a weekend of sin, not realizing that he was walking straight into the heart of his wife's kingdom, and straight to his own spectacular destruction. Richard Sterling adjusted the knot of his silk tie. His reflection stared back at him from the polished obsidian window of the corner office, 45 floors below. The city lay spread out like a circuit board, a complex web of power and money that he, Richard Sterling, senior vice president of Sterling and Finch Capital, had mastered. He was a king surveying his dominions. His suit was custom-made on Sewell Row. The watch on his wrist was like a Philip Pipp Nautilus, and the car waiting for him downstairs was a Rolls-Royce Ghost, midnight blue. These weren't just things. They were proof of his success, evidence of his relentless climb up the corporate ladder. His life was a carefully curated masterpiece. His Park Avenue penthouse has been featured in architectural magazines. His 2 children were enrolled in the most exclusive private schools money can buy. And there was also his wife, Victoria. Beautiful, elegant, from a good family, although the one he always considered to himself to be old money, new poverty. She was the perfect corporate wife. She ran the household with quiet efficiency, hosted impeccable dinner parties, and never questioned his late nights at the office. For 15 years, she had been a constant, predictable, and, if he was honest with himself, rather boring part of his perfect life. He saw it as a valuable asset, like a blue-chip stock that paid reliable, if unexciting, dividends. A cautious knock on the mahogany door brought him out of his reverie. "Come in," he said. His voice was smooth and commanding. The door opened, revealing Jessica Monroe. She was 26, with whiskey-colored eyes and a mane of honey-blonde hair that fell to her shoulders. She was a junior analyst in the mergers and acquisitions department. Edgy enough to be interesting, but not so ambitious as to be threatening. She was Victoria's antithesis in every way. Where Victoria was classically elegant and quietly reserved, Jessica was flamboyant, demanding, and thrillingly transparent in her admiration for his power and wealth. She closed the door softly behind her, a playful smile on her lips. "Everything is ready for this weekend, boss," she purred, leaning against his desk. The scent of her expensive perfume, a gift from him, filled the air. "Everything is organized to perfection," Richard said. A smug smile graced his own lips. He walked toward her, placing his hands on her waist. The presidential suite at the Grand Elysee, champagne on ice, a private dinner reservation at Losafia, and a weekend where your only job is to enjoy yourself. Jessica's eyes widened. "The Grand Elysee, Richard. This place is legendary. I thought it was impossible to get a room there on short notice. For most people, it is," he said, enjoying the look of awe on her face. "But the name Sterling still opens doors, my dear. I made one call to the concierge, mentioned a potential corporate account, and they practically rolled out the red carpet." He felt a familiar surge of pride. This was his power, the ability to bend the world to his will with a single phone call. He told Victoria he was flying to Terge for an emergency banking conference. It was the perfect lie, plausible, important sounding, and requiring him to be completely unavailable. He'd even packed a briefcase with fake financial statements, a theatrical element he found amusing. Victoria packed his suitcase, as she always did. Her expression was calm and unquestioning. She even reminded him to take his blood pressure medication. The irony was delicious. "And Victoria?" Jessica asked. Her voice was a soft whisper. A hint of uncertainty clouded her features. Richard waved his hand dismissively. "She believes I'll be negotiating with Swiss bankers all weekend. She's probably planning her schedule for a charity event or discussing flower arrangements with the gardener. Her world is small, limited. She won't suspect a thing." He truly believed it. Victoria lived in the gilded cage he'd built for her. She had her charities, her breakfasts, her book club with other society wives. He financed it all, of course, providing her with a generous allowance that kept her comfortable and, he assumed, content. He convinced himself that her lack of ambition was a sign of her contentment, not a sign of anything hidden. She was a relic, a beautiful woman from a bygone era who didn't understand the blood and sweat of modern ambition. She had no idea how the real world worked, the world he dominated. "Okay," Jessica breathed, relaxing in his arms. "I want you all to myself. You will have me," he promised, kissing her deeply. The thrill of the forbidden, the sheer audacity of it was intoxicating. He was Richard Sterling. He made the rules. This weekend wasn't just about fun. It was a celebration of his own untouchable status. He took his mistress to the most luxurious hotel in the city, a place synonymous with the established elite, and he did it right under his wife's nose. The sheer audacity of the act was half the fun. As he held Jessica, the image of Victoria calmly folding his shirts and putting them in his suitcase flashed through his mind. He felt a fleeting, almost imperceptible tingle of something. Not guilt, but a faint unease. He immediately discarded it. It was simply the last remnant of ordinary conscience, and he no longer needed it. The Rolls-Royce Ghost came to a silent stop beneath the ornate wrought-iron and glass canopy of the Granzian. A doorman in a clean, dark green uniform with gold piping moved with practiced grace to open Richard's door before he even fully realized they had arrived. "Welcome to Grand Ellison." "Mr. Sterling," said the doorman. His voice was a respectful murmur. He recognized Richard, or at least recognized the car and the suit. That was all that mattered. Richard stepped onto the granite curb, feeling the familiar sense of arrival that came with entering such an establishment. This was his natural habitat. He was not a guest here. He was a member of the class of people for whom such places were built. Jessica appeared from the other side. Her eyes widened as she took in the hotel's facade. An architectural masterpiece, Baz-Ar is all about limestone carving, majestic arches, and soaring columns. She looked momentarily depressed. A girl from a small town in the land of giants. Richard found this charming. He took her arm. His touch was firm and soothing. "Try to look like you belong here," he whispered with a patronizing smile. Her momentary hesitation vanished, replaced by a determined glint in her eyes. She lifted her chin, squeezed his hand, and together they walked through the revolving bronze doors. The hall was breathtaking. It was a cathedral of opulence. The ceiling soared 3 stories high, adorned with a magnificent fresco of classical gods resting on clouds. A colossal crystal chandelier, rumored to have been salvaged from a French palace, hung in the center, casting a warm golden light over everything. The floors were a checkerboard of Italian marble, polished to a mirror shine. The air was thick with the scent of fresh lilies and old money. The muffled sounds of quiet conversation, the distant clinking of glasses from the lobby bar, and the soft strains of a live pianist created a symphony of exquisite tranquility. Richard confidently. He strode toward the reception desk, a long, imposing counter of polished mahogany. A woman with an elegant chignon and a welcoming smile immediately gave them her full attention. "Good afternoon, sir. Welcome to the Grand Hotel. Richard Sterling," he announced, placing his black American Express Centurion credit card on the counter. "I have a reservation for the presidential suite." The receptionist's professional smile did not waver, but Richard saw the questionable respect in her eyes. The presidential suite wasn't just a room, it was a statement. It was reserved for royalty, heads of state, and titans of industry. "Of course, Mr. Sterling, we've been expecting you," she said. Her fingers danced across the keyboard. "Everything is fine. Your luggage will be delivered immediately. We've also taken the liberty of chilling a bottle of 2008 Dom Perignon upon your arrival." "Excellent," said Richard. A dismissive nod was his only thanks. He turned to Jessica, who was trying her best to look casual but couldn't hide her excitement. She secretly took a photo of the chandelier with her phone. He gently lowered her hand. "No photos, darling," he muttered. "This is bad form. You are not a tourist." She blushed slightly but put the phone away. "Yes, sorry, just incredible." An elderly man with a perfectly straight back and a reserved demeanor appeared next to them. "Mr. Sterling, if you will follow me, I will show you to your room." They followed him through the spacious hall. Their footsteps echoed softly on the marble. They passed elegantly dressed guests and a quiet army of staff who seemed to move with silent, synchronized purpose. The elevator was a wood-paneled jewel box with a plush velvet bench. Rising smoothly, the bellhop spoke in a low, respectful tone. "The presidential suite is located on the penthouse floor, sir. He has his own key to the private elevator for absolute privacy." He handed Richard a heavy, gold-plated keycard. "You will have a devoted butler, Mr. Henderson. At your service, 24 hours a day. He's already waiting for you upstairs." "Very well," Richard replied in a dry tone. The elevator doors opened directly into a private lobby. Double doors of rich, dark wood stood before them. The bellhop unlocked and opened the door, stepping aside with an elegant gesture. The room was even more impressive than Richard had imagined. It was less a hotel room and more like a spacious penthouse apartment. The living room had floor-to-ceiling windows offering 180-degree panoramic views of the city skyline and the park below. A grand piano stood in one corner, a fully stocked bar in the other. The furniture was a mix of antiques and modern designer pieces, all upholstered in cotton and silk in shades of cream, gold and royal blue. Jessica gasped, letting go of Richard's hand and spinning around in the center of the room. "Richard, this is bigger than my entire apartment building." He laughed, a rich, smug sound. "This, my dear, is how the other half lives." "No, wait, that's how the other 1% lives." The bellhop gave them a brief tour. A formal dining room, a study, a master bedroom with a 4-poster bed, and a bathroom that was a marble sanctuary, complete with sauna and jacuzzi with city views. After the bellhop had been generously rewarded and left, Richard went to the bar and poured 2 glasses from a chilled bottle of Dom Perignon. He handed one to Jessica, who stood by the huge window, mesmerized by the view. "A toast," he said, clinking his glass with hers to a perfect weekend. "For us," she replied. Her eyes shone with adoration. They drank expensive champagne, bubbling on their tongues. Richard felt invincible. Everything was perfect. Every detail was controlled. Every contingency is planned for. In this room, high above the world, he was untouchable. He successfully divided his life into the compartment. Beautiful wife in a penthouse on a venue park. An exciting lover in this palace in the sky. He believed that he had complete control over his universe. A master puppeteer pulling all the right strings. He could not know that one of those threads, a thread he had long thought broken and forgotten, was tied to the very foundations of the building in which he stood. The first day was a blur of hedonic perfection. They ordered room service from a menu that seemed unlimited, luxuriated in plush robes, and made full use of the room's luxurious amenities. Richard felt a deep sense of satisfaction. He deserved it. The stress of multi-billion-dollar deals and market fluctuations melted away in the face of such absolute comfort. That evening, they dined at La Sofia, the hotel's 3 Michelin-star restaurant. The maitre d' greeted Richard by name, seating them at the best table in the house, a secluded corner booth, overlooking the restaurant's private garden. The food was a complex display of culinary art. Dish after dish arrived, each one more refined than the last. Richard ordered a bottle of Chateau Margaux, which cost more than Jessica's month's rent, and he enjoyed the way her eyes widened when he told her the price. He was demonstrating his power for her, and she was the perfect audience. Throughout the evening, he told her stories of his corporate triumphs, the deals he had made and the rivals he had crushed. He portrayed himself as a modern titan, and she listened with rapt attention. Her hand lay on his thigh under the table. He felt more powerful, more alive than he had in years. It was the confirmation he craved, adoration that his wife, Victoria, never truly gave. Victoria's admiration was always quiet and restrained. It was the quiet approval of a partner, not the breathless worship of a devotee. The next morning, Richard woke up late. The sun streamed through a gap in the heavy silk curtains. Jessica was still sleeping. Her blonde hair flowed across the pillows, which had an incredibly high thread count. He slipped out of bed, feeling rested and content. He decided to take a steam bath in the marble bathroom before ordering breakfast. Stepping out of the steam shower, he reached for one of the thick, heavy robes hanging on the heated hanger. It was incredibly soft, made from the finest Egyptian cotton. He put it on and tied the belt. His eyes scanned the reflection in the fog-free mirror. That's when he noticed it. On the lacan of the robe, embroidered with thin, elegant silver thread, was a monogram. It was the letter D, intertwined with a V. He frowned, tracing the letters with his finger. What did this mean? He vaguely remembered the name of the hotel manager who had been mentioned, Dubu. It may have been for Viscount Dubois of Izuminka, for the founders of the hotel. It seemed plausible. The hotel was steeped in old European traditions, and yet there was a strange, specific detail. He waved her off. It was just a monogram. He returned to the master suite in his robe, belt tightly cinched, and called for their butler, Mr. Henderson, to arrange breakfast. As he waited, his gaze wandered around the room, now noticing small details he had missed in his initial admiration. He noticed stationery on the red table, thick cream-colored cardboard. He took the sheet. In the upper corner, in the same elegant font as the monogram, were the intertwined initials VD. A faint, unidentifiable unease began to stir in the pit of his stomach. It was like hearing one false note in an otherwise flawless symphony. When Mr. Henderson arrived with a trolley loaded with their breakfast, smoked salmon, truffled eggs, fresh pastries, and silver coffee pots, Richard decided to ask. "Mr. Henderson," he began, trying to sound casual, "I was just admiring the hotel branding." "Those initials," he said, gesturing to the stationery. "VD is for the name of the hotel's founder." The butler, his face a mask of professional reserve, froze for a split second. "The monogram represents the owner, sir. It has been the hotel's trademark for a very long time." The answer was polite, professional, and meant absolutely nothing to him. The slight hesitation, however, did not go unnoticed by Richard. He was a man who read people for a living, who could call a bluff across a conference table. The butler was evasive. "I see," Richard said, dropping the subject, but unable to let it go. As he ate his breakfast, the letters echoed in his mind. The familiarity with them was excruciating. It tickled the edge of his memory, a name or place he couldn't quite grasp. He thought of Victoria. Her maiden name was Davenport. Victoria Davenport, V.D. The thought struck him with the force of a physical blow. He actually set down his coffee cup with a bang. It couldn't be. It was an absurd coincidence. Her family was wealthy, yes, but they had lost most of their fortune generations ago. Her father, William, was a quiet, unassuming man who had passed away decades ago, leaving Victoria a modest inheritance, which Richard, of course, absorbed into his own portfolio and managed for her. He remembered William as a gentleman of a bygone era, always talking about standards and heritage, but seeming to possess little of substance. He owned a few small boutique hotels, Richard recalled, but nothing on the scale of the Grand Elysian. No, that was impossible. A ridiculous, paranoid leap of logic. There must be hundreds of names that fit those initials. Enderbilt, her devils, much more likely. He glanced at Jessica, who was happily photographing her aesthetically presented breakfast plate for social media. She was oblivious to his inner turmoil. "It's okay, Richard. You look—" "It was like I'd seen a ghost," she said, finally looking up from her phone. "Fine," he snapped. His tone was more subtle than he'd intended. "Just thinking about the markets." He forced himself to relax. He was being an idiot. He was on the cusp of a perfect weekend, and he was letting a stupid monogram scare him. He was Richard Sterling. He was in control. This was his world, his hotel, his weekend. The initials were a coincidence, nothing more. For the rest of the day, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease. He started seeing the monogram everywhere, on tiny silver sugar tongs, on leather room service menus, in the corner of linen napkins. Every time he saw it, the image of his wife's calm, serene face flashed through his mind. The woman he thought he knew so well, the woman he dismissed as simple and predictable, the gilded cage he'd built for her, suddenly seemed less of a prison and more a fortress he'd never bothered to look inside. An unsettling thought crept in unbidden. What if he'd never known his wife at all? For their last evening, Richard planned to recreate the magic of the first. He made another reservation at La Zafia, this time requesting the chef's tasting menu with a premium wine pairing. He was determined to shake off the strange paranoia that had clung to him since morning. He would drown his anxiety in vintage Bordeaux and reassert his control. He and Jessica got dressed. He wore a dark, tailored suit, and Jessica a stunning red backless dress he'd bought for her. Standing in front of the mirror, he felt a sense of confidence. They looked like a power couple. They belonged here. The monogram was a phantom, a figment of an overwrought imagination. They descended to the restaurant in a private elevator, which once again transported them to a world of subdued elegance. The maitre d', polished a Frenchman named Jean-Luc, greeted them with an even warmer smile than the night before. "Mr. Sterling, it's a pleasure to welcome you again. Your table is ready. The chef is very pleased to present today's menu for you." They were shown to the same secluded table. Richard settled into the plush velvet, the familiar surroundings comforting him. He ordered a bottle of champagne, a circle, to start, a celebratory gesture meant to banish the last of his silly worries. "You know," Jessica said, leaning forward and placing her hand on his, "this has been the most incredible weekend of my life. I feel like a princess." "You deserve it," Richard said. His confidence was returning. He was being ridiculous. This was his life. He made it happen. The first few courses were divine. A delicate oyster with fresh onions, then seared scallops with a citrus foam. Conversation was light, and Jessica's laughter was like music, washing away the last of his worries. He was just about to raise a glass to their future when he noticed a subtle change in the atmosphere of the restaurant. A quiet energy, a ripple of tension spread from the entrance. The staff, usually the model of calm professionalism, seemed to stand a little straighter. Jean-Luc, the maitre d', was conferring in a hushed, urgent tone with a man in a dark suit who was wearing a security headset. Richard watched with mild curiosity. "It looks like some important guest is arriving," he remarked to Jessica. A moment later, Jean-Luc began to move toward their table. His expression was a carefully constructed mask of apology and deference. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "Mr. Sterling," he began in a quiet voice, "my sincerest apologies for the interruption." "Is there a problem?" Richard asked, a hint of irritation in his voice. Before Jean-Luc could answer, the source of the commotion became clear. A small group of people had entered the restaurant and were now standing at the entrance, looking around the room. At the head of the group was a woman. Richard's blood ran cold. The glass of champagne in his hand suddenly felt heavy. His fingers were numb. It was Victoria. She was not the Victoria he had left at home, the woman in cashmere cardigans and demure pearls. This was a different creature entirely. She wore a stunningly tailored dark blue business suit that accentuated her tall, slender figure. Her hair, usually in a soft bob, was styled in a sleek, severe bob that framed her face with an expression of icy calm and absolute power. Her only jewelry was a pair of large diamond stud earrings that sparkled like shards of ice. She was surrounded two men. One was an older, distinguished gentleman with silver hair and sharp eyes, a man Richard recognized with a jolt of horror. Arthur Ernati, the legendary, infamous, ruthless corporate lawyer who had been a close friend of Victoria's father. The other was the hotel's general manager, a man Richard recognized from photographs in the hotel brochure. They stood slightly behind her, like loyal lieutenants escorting their general. Jessica, following Richard's frozen gaze, turned. "Richard? Who is this? Do you know her?" she whispered, a puzzled expression on her face. "She looks a bit like you." Her voice trailed off as the reality of the situation began to sink in. Victoria's eyes swept the room calmly and methodically before landing squarely on their table. There was no shock in her gaze, no surprise. There was only cold, deliberate recognition. It was the look of a predator who had finally found its prey. The entire restaurant fell silent. The patrons frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths, their hushed conversations dead. The only sound was the soft click of Victoria's heels on the marble floor as she began to walk toward them. It was the longest walk of Richard's life. Each step echoed in the cavernous silence. The beating of drums marked the seconds before his world collapsed. His mind frantically tried to form a lie, an explanation, a path to salvation, but there was none. The carefully constructed walls of his double life weren't just cracking, they were evaporating before his eyes. He looked at Jessica, whose face had paled. Her red lipstick was frozen in a smile of horror. He looked at the other diners. Their faces were a mixture of curiosity and pity. And then he looked back at his wife, who was now only a few feet away. In her eyes he didn't see the wounded spouse he might have expected. He saw a stranger. He saw the queen who had come to reclaim her throne, and he knew with a certainty that pierced him to the bone that he was nothing more than an interloper in her kingdom. Victoria stopped at their table. She didn't look at Jessica. Her entire concentration, cold and undivided, was on Richard. The scent of her perfume, a subtle, expensive scent he hadn't smelled on her in years, reached him. It was sharp and clean, like winter air. "Richard," she said. Her voice was perfectly level, devoid of any emotion. It was the voice she used to give instructions to the staff, calm and final. "I believe you are sitting in my seat." The statement hung in the air, a masterpiece of double entendre. Risha stared at her, his mouth dry. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. The carefully crafted persona of Richard Sterling, master of the universe, was shattering like cheap glass. "Victoria," he stuttered, his mind a blank slate of panic. "What? What are you doing here? I thought you were in New York. Charity goal." A small, humorous smile touched her lips. I canceled. Something more important required my attention. Her gaze finally slid to Jessica. A quick, dismissive glance that took in the expensive dress and the frightened expression. She looked at her not as a rival, but as one might look at a piece of furniture that was out of place. "And I see you brought a guest." Jessica cowered in her chair, looking at Richard with pleading, frightened eyes. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. Victoria returned her attention to Richard. "I have to say, Richard, I'm impressed. Presidential suite, Losafia. You have expensive taste. It's comforting to know that you value the family business." Family business? The words hit him like a physical blow, connecting the terrible dots that had been tormenting him all day. Monogram VD. Victoria Davenport. "I don't understand," he managed to say, although the truth was crashing down on him with the force of a tsunami. "Let me make this clear for you," Victoria said. Her voice dropped, becoming slightly more precise. Every word with a carefully sharpened blade. "My father, William Davenport, founded the Davenport Hospital Group 60 years ago. His first hotel was a small inn in the countryside, but he was a brilliant man. He built the empire piece by piece with his own hands. Gran Elysian was his masterpiece, his crown jewel. When he died, he left behind his entire controlling interest. All this is for me." She paused, letting the information sink in. The entire restaurant listened, captivated by the real-life drama unfolding before them. "For 10 years, she continued, I allowed a board of trustees handpicked by my father to run the day-to-day operations of the company. I preferred the quiet life. I wanted to raise my children. I wanted to be a wife. I trusted that the world my father built was in good hands. And I trusted my husband." Her eyes bored into his, and for the first time he saw the raw pain he had caused her. But it was immediately suppressed, replaced by a will of tempered steel. But recently I decided it was time to take a more active role. Effective last Monday at the annual shareholders' meeting, I dissolved the board of trustees and assumed my rightful position. I am the sole current chairwoman of Davenport Hospitality Group, which owns this hotel and 117 others around the world. The monogram you saw everywhere doesn't mean Vic Du Bois. It means Victoria Davenport. Welcome to my hotel, Richard. The silence in the room was absolute. Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He was no king in a conquered territory. He was a fool who threw a party in the lion's den, not knowing the lion was at home. Victoria then turned her steely gaze to Jessica. Miss Monroe, was it not? Jessica nodded, trembling. You are an analyst at Sterling Finch Capital. I believe sleeping with a senior vice president, your immediate supervisor, is a gross violation of your company's ethical standards, not to mention a serious breach of common sense. Consider yourself fired. Mr. Abernathy has already contacted your firm's head of HR and its board of directors. I would not go to the office on Monday. Jessica let out a quiet, strangled sob. Her dream weekend had turned into a career-destroying nightmare. Finally, Victoria turned to the man she had been married to for 15 years. As for you, Richard, our joint bank accounts, which contain funds from the family trust you so generously offered to manage for me, have been frozen. The locks on the Park Avenue penthouse have been changed. Your things are being packed right now and sent to your office. Don't worry about going home. You're no longer welcome there. She reached into her purse and pulled out a document, placing it on the table between Richard's plate and his glass of wine. These are the divorce papers, drawn up by Mr. Abernathy. My terms are non-negotiable. You will find that I have meticulously documented your infidelities for the last 3 years. You will sign them. You will leave with nothing but the clothes on your back, and you will never see our children again without my explicit, controlled consent. If you fight me, I will use the full force of my resources to destroy not only your career, but your very name. I will make sure the name Sterling is synonymous with humiliation and failure in every financial circle on the globe. Am I understood? Richard could only stare at her, speechless. The woman he had patronized, underestimated, and dismissed as a decorative object, had just systematically destroyed his entire life in less than 3 minutes on a public forum, with the cold precision of a surgeon. With that, she turned. "Jean-Luc," she said to the Methodist, who stood nearby, pale and petrified, "please ensure that Mr. Sterling's guests are escorted off the premises, and present Mr. Sterling with the full amount for his stay. He will pay with his personal card." She took one last long look at Richard. It was a look of finality at the end of an old chapter closing, and a new one beginning. There was no hatred in him, only a deep and chilling indifference. Then, accompanied by her lawyer and the hotel manager, Chairwoman Victoria Davenport turned and walked out of the restaurant. Her posture was perfect, her composure absolute, leaving behind the smoldering ruins of the life she had just burned. For a long moment after Victoria left, Richard remained frozen, a statue of shock and humiliation. The silence in the restaurant was finally broken by Jessica's muffled sob. She pushed back her chair. Her face was a mess of runny mascara and disbelief. "My work," she whispered, looking at Richard as if she was seeing him for the first time. Not as a titan of industry, but as the architect of its collapse. You said that everything was under control." "I thought that was how it was." He stumbled over his words, tasting them like ash in his mouth. 2 discreet but firm guards materialized at their desk. Jank, maître d'hôtel, approached them. His face was a mask of professional regret. "Miss," he said softly to Jessica, "if you would please come with us." Jessica looked wildly from the guards to Richard, but he didn't offer to help. He couldn't even meet her eyes. Humiliated, she grabbed her small clutch bag and allowed herself to be led away. Her red dress was a stain of shame against the muted tones of the restaurant. The moment she left, Jean-Luc put the leather folder with the bill on the table. "Your bill, Mr. Sterling?" Richard stared at him. He opened it indifferently. The number inside was astronomical. Luxury, room service, vintage wines, chef's tasting menus. It was a sum that would have made most people gasp, but to him it must have been trivial. He took out his wallet, his hands shaking slightly. He handed Jean-Luc a black card. The Metro Hotel returned a minute later. His expression became even more painful. "My apologies, Mr. Sterling. The card was rejected." "What?" Richard laughed. "This is impossible. Do it again." "We have done it, sir, 3 times. It looks like the account has been blocked. Joint accounts, of course. Victoria didn't just freeze them. She probably canceled his additional cards." He felt another card, a corporate visa. "Try this one." Jean-Luc returned again, shaking his head slightly. "Also rejected, sir." The blood rushed to Richard's face. The other visitors no longer pretended not to look. Their whisper was a low hum of condemnation. He was no longer one of them. He was the evening's entertainment. "This is funny. There must be a mistake." Richard was raging. His voice rose. The general manager, the same man who had accompanied Victoria, approached the table. His behavior was no longer respectful. It was cold, formal. "Mr. Sterling, perhaps you have another payment method. If not, we will have to consider it theft of services and involve the authorities." The threat hung thick and suffocating in the air. Richard Sterling, the man who moved billions of dollars before breakfast, couldn't pay his hotel bill. The humiliation was absolute. He did not have any valid cash cards. He was trapped. Mesa Habanati, Victoria's lawyer, reappeared at the edge of the dining room. He walked up to the manager, said a few quiet words, and then turned to Richard. "Mr. Sterling," he said of Banat in a gravel-like voice. "Mrs. Sterling, I mean Miss Davenport, has kindly offered to pay your bill. This will be deducted from any minimum settlement you might have been hoping for in a divorce. Consider it her final gift to you." He pushed the divorce papers closer to Richard. "I suggest we sign them now." Confused, Richard picked up the pen. His signature, usually a bold, confident flourish, was a trembling, pathetic scrawl. He was completely and utterly outplayed. "Now," the general manager said in a firm voice, "you have 10 minutes to pack your things and leave the premises. Security will escort you." The walk of shame from the restaurant, through the grand lobby and into the elevator was excruciating. Every glance from a guest, every look from an employee felt like a physical blow. Reverence and respect were gone, replaced by contempt and cold indifference. In the suite, his things had already been carelessly thrown into a suitcase by a stone-faced butler. 10 minutes later, Richard Sterling stood on the sidewalk at the Grand Lysian, the same place where he had arrived feeling like a king just 24 hours earlier. The doorman who had greeted him so warmly now looked straight through him. His Rolls-Royce is gone, towed, he assumed, since it was registered in Victoria's name. A cold, miserable rain began to drizzle. He tried to call an Uber, but his app was linked to canceled cards. He stood there. A man in he found himself in a $1,000 suit with a useless phone and an empty wallet. As taxis and limousines sped past, he was abandoned. He began to walk. The drizzle soaked his jacket. He had nowhere to go. His home was no longer his. His office would become a place of shame. His friends, he knew, would side with power and old money. They would side with Victoria Davenport. News of this spectacular humiliation would travel through their circles at the speed of light. He found a payphone, a relic of another era, and used the few coins in his pocket to call his only remaining ally, a junior partner at the firm named Frank. "Frank, this is Richard. I have problems, a real mess." He tried to explain, but his story came out as panicked, incoherent babble. Frank listened, and when Richard finished, there was a long pause. "Richard," Frank said, his voice tight, "I just got a letter from the board of directors. It's about you. They're calling an emergency meeting Monday morning, Richard. They're invoking the morality clause. Victoria's lawyer sent them the whole dossier. Photos, bank statements. That's it. They're going to fire you." The phone slipped from Richard's numb fingers, slamming against the metal of the payphone booth. It was over. All of it. In one evening, he had lost his wife, his children, his home, his mistress, his job, and his fortune. Victoria hadn't just defeated him, she had erased him. He looked up at the glittering penthouse of the Lysian Grant, a beacon of power high above the city. He had flown too close to the sun, never realizing that the sun was his wife. And now he was in free falling, with no land in sight. 6 months later, the world had moved on, and Richard Sterling was left behind. The name that had once commanded respect on Wall Street was now a cautionary whisper, a ghost story told by an ambitious young associate about the dangers of hubris. As Victoria had promised, her victory wasn't just a defeat for him. It was a complete and total erasure. The emergency board meeting at Sterling and Finch Capital was a formality, a quick, clinical execution. His office was cleared before he had a chance to process his dismissal. The morality clause, part of a corporate template he'd never thought twice about, became a guillotine that cut him off from his life's work. His new reality was a suffocating cloak of anonymity and failure. The penthouse on Park Avenue was replaced by a 3-story walk-up apartment in a remote neighborhood, a place that smelled of damp and the neighbors' cooking. Floor-to-ceiling windows that offered panoramic views of the city were now nothing but fly, blown glass overlooking a graffiti-covered brick wall. The silence of his old life, the silence of refined luxury, had been replaced by the constant hum of sirens, arguing neighbors, and the rattling groan of an ancient radiator. He sold the Philippe Patek, then the cufflinks, then the art collection. Each sale was a small death, chipping away at pieces of the man he had been until only an empty shell remained. He now worked for a small, faceless financial firm called Apex Solutions, a name so generic it was offensive. His corner office was a cramped cubicle under the glare of flickering fluorescent lights. He, who had once moved markets with a single phone call, now spent his days performing mind-numbing data entry and compliance checks, work once done by interns. He never bothered to learn names. His boss was a man 15 years younger, a smug, ambitious graduate who treated Richard with barely concealed contempt, fully understanding who he once was and reveling in his downfall. Sometimes he would see young women in the office, vibrant and energetic, who reminded him of Jessica, and he would feel a surge of bitter resentment. It wasn't remorse for her ruined career, but anger that his appetites had brought him here. His evenings were the worst. A profound loneliness was a physical presence in his small apartment. He tried calling old friends, men with whom he shared cigars and century-old scotch. The calls went unanswered, The few who picked up were curt and cold, apologizing before quickly ending the conversation. He was a liability, a social leper. He was no longer a member of the club. He was just a man in a cheap apartment, haunted by the ghost of his old life, self-pity. The poison he drank every night along with cheap whiskey. While Richard sank into the crack of her own making, Victoria was ascending. As she assumed her role as chairwoman of Devonport Hospitality Group, she wasn't just competent, she was formidable. Years of quiet observation, underestimation, and rejection had forged her into a shrewd and decisive leader. She saw what the old board of directors, composed of men content with the status quo, had missed. One afternoon in the main boardroom on the top floor of the Devonport Tower, she was unveiling her flagship project, the Green Devonport Initiative. It was a multi-billion-dollar 10-year plan to transform the entire hotel chain into carbon neutral, focused on sustainable renewable energy supplies and community investment. A portly, gray-haired board member named Gerald Croft, a remnant of the old guard and a friend of her father's, cleared his throat condescendingly. Victoria, with all due respect, that's a noble sentiment, but the numbers are idealistic. The initial investment will cut into our profits for years. Our shareholders expect dividends, not virtue signaling. Victoria didn't flinch. She met his gaze with her calm, steady eyes. "Thank you, Gerald. I appreciate your traditional perspective." The word traditional was pronounced with surgical precision, making it sound synonymous with outdated. She pressed a button, and the screen behind her filled with complex charts and data projections. "What you call virtue signaling, Gerald, I call preparing for the future. Our key demographic, travelers under 40 with significant disposable income, are increasingly making choices based on corporate ethics and sustainability. This is not an expense, it is an investment in our brand's relevance for the next 50 years. My projections indicate that while we will see a 5% decline in net profit in the first 18 months, positive press, increased brand loyalty, and government tax incentives will lead to a projected 15% increase in market share within 5 years. We will not just be a luxury brand. We will be an ethical luxury brand." She paused, letting the words sink in. "My father built this company on quality and heritage. It's a legacy for the 21st century. The proposal is accepted." A murmur of approval passed through the room. Gerald Croft leaned back in his chair, defeated. From the corner, Arthur Abernathy watched with a rare, proud smile on his face. The slumbering titan had well and truly awakened. Her new life wasn't just in the boardroom. The penthouse on Park Venue, once a cold showroom of Richard's success, had been transformed. It was now a home filled with warmth and laughter. She was there for her children, truly present for the first time. She helped with homework, attended school plays, and had long conversations about their hopes and fears. She discovered joy in the small, real moments she had missed while playing the role of the perfect corporate wife. She wasn't just a chairwoman. She was a mother, a leader, a whole person finally living her own life on his own terms. One crisp autumn evening, Richard walked home from the subway station. The collar of his thin coat turned up against the biting wind. The city that once felt like his kingdom now seemed foreign and hostile. He stopped at a newsstand. The bright shine of the magazines was a sharp contrast to the gray sidewalk. And there she was. Her face was on the cover of Forbes. It was a stunning photograph. Victoria stood on the balcony of the Grand Elizan presidential suite. His suite. The city lights shimmered behind her like a carpet of diamonds at her feet. She looked straight into the camera, an expression of serene power and unwavering confidence on her face. The headline was a coronation. Victoria Davenport, like a quiet heiress, had reinvented a global empire. His hand shook as he paid for the magazine. Back in the oppressive silence of his apartment, he sat under the single dim lamp and read the article. It was geography, a glowing tribute to her brilliance. It detailed her sustainability initiatives, her shrewd acquisitions, her boutique hotel chains, her employee profit-sharing program. It quoted industry rivals expressing their grudging admiration. Then he got to the part about her personal life. After an amicable divorce from her ex-husband, the text said, Davenport had focused on her children and her role as a transformative leader in the hotel industry, proving that a new chapter could be the most rewarding. Amicable divorce. The word brought a sharp, dry laugh to the back of his throat. He wasn't the villain in her story. He wasn't even a footnote. He was a typo to be corrected, an inconvenient detail erased from the narrative entirely. He let the magazine slip from his fingers. He fell to the floor, landing with Victoria's triumphant face looking up at him. He'd never really seen her. He'd looked at her every day for 15 years and seen only a reflection of his own success, a beautiful, passive accessory. He failed to see the keen mind, the patient heart, and the core of Davenport steel that coursed through her veins. He thought he was the master of his universe, the sun around which all things revolved. But he was only an insignificant moon orbiting a star, foolish enough to think that his own dim light was the source of all power. He stood and walked to the window, looking out at the dark, unforgiving brick wall that was his horizon. He imagined her standing in her office atop Davenport Tower, looking out over the endless, glittering expanse of the city. A city that was now hers to conquer. High above, a new dawn had broken for Victoria Davenport, bright and full of promise. For Richard Sterling, left in the darkness below, a permanent and deeply earned twilight had arrived. Richard Sterling had learned the hardest lesson of all. The person you underestimate most may be the one who holds all the cards. He saw his wife as part of the decor of his perfect life, only to discover she owned the entire building. And he was nothing more than a temporary guest who had overstayed his welcome. Victoria's story is a powerful reminder that power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient power, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim it. It's a tale of justice, empowerment, and the spectacular consequences of betrayal. If you've been captivated by Victoria's incredible journey from silent partner to ruling chairwoman, be sure to hit the like button to show your support. What do you think of Richard's stunning fall? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Share this story with someone who loves tales of epic place and empowerment. And most importantly, if you want more gripping stories like this, be sure to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thanks for listening.